Hey there, and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Paris Schutz has the evening off. Here's what we're looking at.
We share a lot in common.
Mayor-elect Johnson meets with Governor Pritzker following his runoff victory. Breaking down the latest in the ComEd 4 trial.
Increased accessibility benefits everyone.
A federal judge just ruled that Chicago's crosswalks must be accessible to all pedestrians. How young voters move the needle in the mayoral runoffs and how organizations are working to keep that civic engagement up.
In the end, winners are winners. The winners go to the White House.
Critics call a foul on double standards following the women's college basketball championships.
Birria is not only something we do for a living, it's actually embedded in our DNA.
And cooking up a century-old family recipe from Mexico. And now to some of today's top stories. Chicago's new mayor-elect Brandon Johnson is making the rounds today, meeting with Governor J.B. Pritzker. The two men say they chatted about city finances, job creation, and growing small businesses, but didn't get into specifics on Johnson's tax proposals, which include taxes on real estate transfers and aviation fuel.
The reliance upon property taxes have left a lot of families in economic turmoil and despair. But we also recognize that the governor and I are committed to making investments in communities that need it.
One area they do plan to work on together and swiftly is bringing the Democratic National Convention to Chicago. Faculty at a third Illinois university could be walking off the job and on strike next week. This one at Governors State University, where faculty and staff say an 8-hour bargaining session with the administration today still failed to reach a contract deal. The two sides are at odds over compensation and workload. The union says GSU has until 5:30 Monday afternoon to return to the bargaining table, or they strike on Tuesday. Chicago State University educators have been on strike for some of the same issues since Monday. Eastern Illinois University faculty and staff walked off the job yesterday. Illinois high school students see the largest increase of any state in the percentage of students receiving a 3 or higher on an advanced placement exam. A score of 3 means a student qualifies for free college credit at any public college or university in the state. The Illinois State Board of Education says among the class of 2022, 1 in 4 high school graduates received that score, and the number of students who even took an AP test increased 42% in the last decade in Illinois, compared to a 14% increase nationwide. Up next in the program, breaking down new testimony in the so-called ComEd 4 trial. Reporter Matt Masterson with that story right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
We are several weeks into the bribery trial of 4 former ComEd executives and lobbyists. WTTW News reporter Matt Masterson joins us now with a recap of what jurors heard this week and what to expect next week. Matt, so yesterday's hearing, jurors heard from Juan Ochoa. Who is he and how is he part of this alleged corruption?
So Ochoa is the former head of McPier, the group that owns McCormick Place and Navy Pier, and he's also a one-time member of ComEd's board of directors, and it's that role where he comes into this trial. Prosecutors have said that his appointment to that seat was part of this bribery scheme with former Speaker Mike Madigan. Ochoa testified that he was seeking approval from Madigan to get the seat, and that while he was seeking this appointment, Madigan would provide him with updates rather than ComEd. And jurors later heard recorded phone calls where Madigan told longtime confidant Michael McLean that they needed to push to get Ochoa on the seat, and then McLean relaying that message to former CEO Ann Pramaggiore that they needed to keep pushing to get him this appointment.
So briefly explain for those who haven't been following, what prosecutors are alleging these 4 to have done.
Yeah, so Pramaggiore and McLean, along with former ComEd executive John Hooker and former ComEd consultant Jay Doherty, were allegedly bribing Madigan to earn his support on legislation that was favorable to the utility company in Springfield. This allegedly included things like hiring Madigan allies as subcontractors for no-work jobs, bringing in interns for ComEd from Madigan's ward, and also these efforts allegedly to get Ochoa on this board of directors seat.
So over the course of the trial, we've been hearing phone recordings, one from earlier this week from Mike McLean. What was notable about that one?
So much of the prosecution's case is rested on these wiretapped phone conversations. And in this one, it was between McLean and John Hooker in February of 2019. And they were discussing hiring these subcontractors for these no-work jobs. And during that conversation, McLean tells Hooker, we had to hire these guys because Mike Madigan came to us. And that's essentially the heart of the government's case, saying that these four were taking actions not because it was in the best interest or the best course of action, but because Madigan was saying it, and they were doing this to get his support on legislation in Springfield.
Okay, so what's on tap for next week?
So prosecution, they have been calling witnesses for almost 4 weeks now, or over 4 weeks, and they're expected to rest their case by Tuesday, at which point the defense will take over. That's going to last several more weeks, but they will begin calling witnesses of their own sometime next week.
Okay, a few more weeks of keeping up with it for us. Matt Masterson, thanks so much.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Matt's full story on our website. It's all at WTTW.com/news. Though they are typically the smallest voting bloc, more young voters cast their ballot in this week's runoff election than in February. Chicago Board of Elections data shows a 32% increase from February 28th to April 4th for voters ages 18 to 24. Even voters 25 to 34 years old increased their votership by 24%. Joining us now are Stevie Valles, co-executive director of Chicago Votes, and Arsenio Acosta, youth organizer of Good Kids Mad City. Thanks to you both for joining us. Stevie Valles, let's start with you, please. What do you think it was that led to this increase in youth participation in the runoff election compared to the general?
I think the fact that it got down to two candidates was helpful. Two clearly different candidates, too. I think what we've been seeing over the last few elections, actually, in the presidential, in the governor's election, young people turned out at high rates. So I think in addition to that, we're starting to see a shift in what has always been the norm of low youth voter participation, which I think is really exciting.
Okay. Arsenio, the same question for you. What do you think it was that led to more young people casting their ballots this time?
I agree with Stevie, but I would also like to add that the participation that organizations put in, like JCAMC, People's Unity Platform, and also like the event that Chicago Votes hosted, that definitely helped it increase.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit more, Arsenio. What initiatives did Good Kids Mad City get into to get more folks out to vote, more young people out to vote?
We did a few events. So first we hosted a mayoral forum. It was more of like a town hall to specifically involve the youth and have the youth be heard. And the difference between other town halls and mayoral forums was that ours was youth led. And also not just that, but GCAMC also went out and talked to college students and encouraged them to vote, along with the People's Unity Platform, colleges like Kennedy King, Malcolm X. And also we had two little like kickbacks for the youth. There was one with around 13 high schools, I believe, that attended, encouraged them to vote. And then Good Kids Mad City, we had another one where we actually provided support with state IDs and also encouraged people to go out and vote.
And Arsenio, I know you're 17, so not quite able to vote yet, but why is this important to you? Why do you participate in getting more people your age to vote?
Definitely. I feel like the youth isn't really involved as they should, so I feel like the youth should be more involved. And also a lot of the stuff that candidates do affect the youth, like public safety, measures around school safety, and also like the programs that they offer us, after school programs, just in general programs to keep the youth occupied, that definitely is affected by candidates.
Stevie, over to you. What do you think are some of the most effective ways to reach potential young voters?
Yeah, so we did a lot of get out the vote work. It's kind of like the core of our organization is to engage young voters. Trying to have non-traditional forms of civic education is really important. We distributed thousands and had a reach of over 1 million digitally through a voter guide that was nonpartisan, that was designed in a very compelling manner. actually designed by people who are formerly incarcerated. And I think that drew young people to the information they needed to cast their ballot. Also creating non-traditional spaces to have conversations about politics and civics. We had a weekend of happy hours that included a fashion show, art installations, an open mic night where we gave out our voter guide, registered young people to vote, made plans with them to go cast their ballots. We had a parade to the polls that Good Kids Mad City was a part of, which was really cool.
Well, and so when you're having some of those conversations in those non-traditional spaces, how do you, what are the words you use to help them sort of overcome the disillusionment that, that young people can't make a difference, that their votes don't matter?
Well, especially in municipal elections, that's just not true. I think what we saw points to that. Young people between 18 and 35 made up the largest portion of the electorate, and that had the biggest impact on who became mayor. And that is just like straight to the point, like your vote does matter. It has an impact, and if you don't vote, that doesn't matter because people are going to get elected anyway, so you might as well make your voice heard. And if we do it as a block, chances are the person who's elected is more likely going to listen to what we advocate for as a follow-up.
Arseny, what are some of the barriers that young people face with getting involved civically? Is it, could it be confusion over voting location or, busy with school and extracurriculars and balancing time and family?
A lot of youth don't feel like they're heard or like their vote matters, like Stevie has said. And I also see that a lot of people my age, they don't find no interest because they're not really educated. So there's a barrier between like educating themselves on what it means to vote and why your vote matters. And also a lot of youth can't afford to get a state ID or don't have the resources to get state IDs. It's just about the resources and like the education barrier and stuff like that.
What role, Arseny, do you think schools have in teaching more civic education and engagement to students?
I feel like schools should definitely be teaching more civic engagement activities. They don't teach you, like most of the stuff that I had learned is because of Good Kids Mad City or events outside of school. So I feel like schools should be endorsing, not just like, oh, vote for this person, but more about like what it means to vote and how your vote can matter and stuff that affects students themselves. Because a lot of the stuff that comes between voting, of course, affects CPS students. So I feel like schools should be educating students more about it.
Stevie, how do you build on this growth? Do you think there'll be even more voters in the next election cycle?
I hope so. I think that we have to keep doing work outside of elections. Participating in democracy doesn't start and finish at the ballot box. These leaders still need to hear from us. There's opportunities to work with schools to teach curriculum around legislative tracking, how to get in touch with your elected leaders, so that we aren't just coming back to this demographic trying to mobilize around the election and then walking away. We're building in the in-between time so that civic knowledge is overwhelmingly better developed in our city, and young people are prepared to cast their ballot, excited to cast their ballot, and understand the significance and the impact that they're going to have when they do turn out and vote.
You've got 4 years to keep working on building that before the next municipal election, of course, a midterm before then. We'll leave it there for now. I'm sure we'll talk again between now and then. Stevie Valles and Arseny Acosta, thank you so much for joining us. And we're back with more right after this. Almost none of Chicago's 2,800 crosswalks with signals are accessible to blind and low vision pedestrians, and the city is breaking the law. Federal judge recently found these crosswalks violate the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Rehabilitation Act. That ruling is the result of a years-long class action lawsuit by a group of local plaintiffs with backing from the U.S. Justice Department. Chicago Tonight's Nick Blumberg has been following this case and joins us now. Nick, How many people does this ruling impact?
Brandis, we're talking about 65,000 blind or low vision pedestrians. It's a huge class of people behind this lawsuit, and they sued over Chicago's failure to make its signalized intersections accessible. Now, that number doesn't even take into account people who might be visiting the city or coming in from the suburbs. Now, Ann Brash is one of the lead plaintiffs in the case, and we spoke with her earlier this year. She says she was nearly hit by a bus crossing a downtown street several years ago when she started to cross at the wrong time.
I want to do all these things. I want to go places. I want to be independent. I don't want to depend on other people, but I'm afraid to cross the streets.
Now, in a statement after the ruling, Brash says this is wonderful news and that it's going to make the city safer. She and the other plaintiffs didn't ask for money. They say they just want to compel the city to install accessible pedestrian signals. Those give audio cues to pedestrians who can't see or can't see well, letting them know that it's safe to cross the street. Right now, blind pedestrians often have to listen for parallel traffic, which is no guarantee, especially in a noisy city like this one.
Nick, now that the judge has found Chicago is breaking civil rights laws, what's next?
Well, I talked with Jelena Kolic. She was one of the plaintiff's attorneys. She says the next step here is to get started negotiating a remedial plan to bring Chicago into compliance. She helped argue a similar case over New York's crosswalks. That city was also found to be in violation of federal civil rights laws. But the negotiations there dragged on, and eventually the judge had to hold a hearing to decide on a remedial plan. That decision gave New York a decade to make 3/4 of its crosswalks accessible. Kolic hopes in Chicago that it doesn't come to that.
We imagine it's going to be a long process, but this decision certainly paves the way for productive and strong remedial plan that we hope will really benefit blind and low vision pedestrians and ultimately everyone, because these units can be helpful to sighted folks as well.
That's because if you're anything like me, you've certainly been distracted by your phone or something out in the environment and you didn't notice that it's time to cross. Now, accessible pedestrian signals will also be a benefit to people who are sighted now, but who experience vision loss in the future. Julie Tai is president of Hadley, which helps adults, particularly older adults, learn how to navigate a new vision disability.
As we are living longer, older adults are at increasing risk for age-related vision loss. So the number of people who are significantly visually disabled is expected to double in the next 25 years or so, from about 7 or 8 million now to as much as 15 million.
Advocates say the benefits of the judge's ruling on accessible crosswalks can also extend beyond Chicago and New York.
Mainly by making these cities realize that such a legal duty does exist, and therefore when they are signalizing their own intersections, they need to be thinking about accessibility.
Kolic says the plaintiffs' representatives haven't met with the city to start negotiations yet, but as you can imagine, they hope to get moving soon.
I am sure they do. Nick Blumberg, thanks so much.
Thank you.
It was the most watched NCAA women's basketball final in television history. Louisiana State University beat the University of Iowa in the women's college basketball championship. But what got all the attention was what happened in the last few seconds of the game. LSU star Angel Reese was met with backlash online for making that "you can't see me" gesture. There it is right there, despite Hawkeyes player Caitlin Clark, who's white, also having done the same move in a previous game. Here's a sneak peek from this weekend's Chicago Tonight Black Voices, where our guests shared their reactions to the backlash Reese has received.
I was upset. I wasn't shocked, wasn't surprised, but I mean, I still can't wrap my mind around how so many adults, grown adults, could just take their anger out on someone so young about something so unimportant, really, in the theme of in the scheme of things in basketball, and such a great game, and that's what they chose to focus on.
Coach, same question to you.
Again, it's just disappointing in some of the leaders in the sports industry, male and female, and again, making about something different than it was. It was two competitors competing. That final game you want to win, go out on a win. They both had great runs. And again, both have done the gesture, but you're seeing the backlash from one side usually. But again, you also were able to see how they grew from it and their great responses to the adults making some different reaction, especially on Twitter.
I don't play much sports, but I get the impression that that kind of, taunting a little bit, it's part of the game. Does it happen?
I would say yes, and it's a little bit more of this generation. John Cena came with the first one, so we're going to emulate something that's cool. And again, both players can back it up. It was great to see for our game. Our game is growing, the athleticism and what they bring to the table. So it's disappointing that people want to chime in at the last second when you have over the 9 million viewers that were already watching and already know about our sport. So that's the disappointing part.
Brandon Pope, same question to you. What was your reaction to that?
Not surprised, but disappointed for sure. It's just bonkers. I'm a big sports guy. I've been covering sports for a while. This is what people do. This is what makes sports great. The intensity, the emotion, the great characters and players. And people just acted like they had never seen a sporting event in their life. And it was back to the same old tropes we've been fighting for years and decades and decades. And so we got to do better, not just for women's basketball, but just for society, because it's just not right the way this dialogue has gone.
And you can watch that full conversation on Chicago Tonight, Black Voices, Saturday at 6:30. There are 7 culinary regions in Mexico, each with their own unique foods, techniques, and flavors that have evolved over centuries. In a classic tale of Mexican ingenuity, the chile-braised stew birria was created as a way to take advantage of an overpopulation of goats in the Jalisco region. 50 years ago, a Jalisciense named Ramon Reyes brought his family's century-old birria recipe to Chicago's southeast side. Now his son is bringing the traditional dish to a new generation. Producer Erica Gunderson recently brought us this story. Here's another taste.
Birria is not only something we do for a living, it's actually embedded in our DNA. I like to believe so.
When Andy Reyes rhapsodizes about the perfect bowl of birria, he has 4 generations of his forebears speaking through him.
I have to have a piece of costilla, the rib, with a little bit of fat and a little bit of meat towards the end, drenched a little bit in consommé with onion and cilantro. First you put the lime, then you get the tortilla, you put the meat, put some salsa, and then you take a bite out of it. That is, for me, birria.
Though Andy is only the 2nd generation of Reyes's to run Birreria Ocotlan, the family's birria recipe goes back to 1926, when his great-grandfather developed his own version of the stewed goat recipe in Ocotlan, Jalisco. When Andy's father, Ramon Reyes, immigrated to the Chicago area, he brought the birria know-how with him.
His uncle was here in Chicago, and at 18, my dad receives this postcard. And it was one of those old school postcards where it said Chicago and it had the skyline. He pulls out the postcard and points out to his friends and says, "Hey guys, look, it's my uncle he lives in Chicago now. And one day I'm gonna sell birria right here."
In 1973, Ramon Reyes made good on that prediction. He took over a small diner at 87th and Commercial and began selling the family's specialty. A second location on 106th Street was added in 1992. Over the years, all 4 of Ramon and Linda Reyes' children worked at the family restaurants.
I remember making my debut officially, when I was 8 years old, and he'd sit me down in the corner and I'd be a chubby little kid eating my taco, I started working here literally in high school. I remember I used to play football and I would have practice on Saturdays. After practice, all my friends would go hang out, I'd come here.
When Ramon stepped away from the business for health reasons 5 years ago, Andy, the youngest child, stepped in.
I wasn't ready, but luckily I have my sisters. That's the beautiful thing about having a family business. You won't be alone.
Since then, Andy has helped steer the restaurant through COVID by bringing some modern marketing to the traditional dish and updating the menu to include trendy quesabirria tacos.
We kept everyone on payroll, but we closed for a month and a half. So what did I do? I got back on social media. ¿Qué pasa? ¿Qué le doy? And because of social media, I got traction.
Andy says he feels a responsibility to his family and the community that sustains them to keep Birreria Ocotlan thriving.
I think the love and the heart that my father put initially into this business, the relationships he's able to build with the community, and I think the recipe itself speaks volumes. We do put a lot of heart and soul into our food. We've been doing this for, close to 100 years now in my family. I've seen 4 or 5 generations come in through the door, and that's very special. If it wasn't for the community, we wouldn't be where we're at. Food is supposed to bring people together. It unites people from all different walks of life, from every culture. So birria is for everybody.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Erica Gunderson.
Looks delicious. You'll find more on Birria Ocotlan on our website. And that's our show for this Friday night. Please join us tomorrow night at 6 for Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. On the show, a new era in Chicago's City Council. We'll catch up with 2 Latino winners in this week's runoff. And then at 6:30 tomorrow on Chicago Tonight, Black Voices, as we mentioned, controversy following the women's college basketball championship game, and critics are calling a foul on double standards. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.
Spend Saturday evening with the Voices of Chicago. Latino Voices at 6 and Black Voices at 6:30. See you on Saturdays.
Next time, a club owner is murdered.
Seems to have been taken by surprise.
And the victim was an unpopular man, making everyone a suspect.
It was only a matter of time before someone made him pay.
Father Brown.
Saturday at 7 on WTTW.
Next time, as the team continues to investigate a murder,
it was fired at point-blank range.
Neville suggests a stakeout.
You want us to spend the night in a haunted house? Yeah. That's such a bad idea.
Death in Paradise.
Saturday at 8 on WTTW.
The 2023 WTTW Great Treasure Hunt Sweepstakes is here. Enter for your chance to win